Okay, there we go. All right. So I am really pleased tonight to share with you about Martha Hughes Cannon. She was the first woman state senator in America. She was a medical doctor. She was a public health and women's rights advocate. And the reason why we scheduled this for this month is because it is 2020 is the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote in America. And ironically, of all things to come together, if Martha Hughes Cannon wanted to be known for two things, it was as a suffragette and a public health advocate. And here we are in the middle of a public health crisis. So she would be very interested. If she were speaking here tonight, we'd have a rousing speech. I just wanted to start with one of her quotes so that you could kind of get to know who she was. She wrote to her friend from med school after they were out of school and doctors, and she said, "Let us not waste our talents in the cauldron of modern nothingness, but strive to become women of intellect and endeavor to do some little good while we live in this protracted gleam called life." Martha Hughes Cannon was born in 1857 in Wales. Her family comes in contact with Mormon missionaries, and they convert to the religion and they migrate to the U.S. in 1860. She then, with her mother, father, and two sisters, at 3 years old, 3 and 4 years old, she crosses the plains as a Mormon pioneer. And on that trip, her baby sister dies. And 2 days after getting to the Salt Lake Valley, her father passes away. And all those who have written about her have noted this as her real motivation for wanting to learn more about medicine and health so that others didn't have those tragedies in their life. She was very practical. These two pictures both show her with short hair. As she at 14 years old, she started setting type for the newspaper, the Deseret News, and also for the women's newspaper, the Women's Exponent, to earn money to go to college. And she studied chemistry at the University of Deseret, which became the University of Utah. In that, she was working and then going to classes at night. We forget in our modern conveniences what that would have been like in the rain and the mud. And she was never vain. She always wanted to look nice, but she was very practical. So she went and had some custom-made men's boots so that she could get through that mud and muck and get to her classes. And she decided hair was a lot of hassle, and she just cut it off. You can see in those pictures her with short hair, which was very unusual for her times and really says a lot about who she was and what she wanted to accomplish. She was mentored by prominent Mormon women. Emmeline B. Wells was the editor of the Women Exponent, who she worked for and mentored her. Eliza R. Snow gave her money eventually when she went to medical school, and women doctors were becoming something that the Utah area wanted to have. And so she was actually set apart, which is an ordinance in the Mormon Church, to attend medical school. She graduates from the University of Deseret in 1878. 1879 through 1880, then she goes to the University of Michigan. The push for women's doctors, I think it's important to understand, was a lot about the Victorian era. And they didn't want male doctors doing obstetrics and gynecology on women. It was akin to adultery, they felt. And so as medicine was becoming more advanced past just giving everybody lobelia or something else, there was a real push from Mormon women, Utah women, to get women doctors qualified to help them. And so, although as a young person, when I first started studying her, I was inspired, I came to understand the nuance that it wasn't all about just women's rights, that it was more about modesty. She goes to the University of Michigan. University of Michigan had just begun accepting women into their medical school. In their original classes, there she is. I've got the arrow pointing to her. Those are the women in her class. At first, they segregated the classes, and they wouldn't have men and women in the same class, and the professors quickly tired of teaching the same thing twice. And so then they put women in a separate room to just hear what was being said. And in 1881, which is right after she graduates, they finally decide, to heck with it, everyone can just be in the same room and we can make this work. But she graduates in 1878. Oh, excuse me, she's past that then. And she graduates in 1880. 10 women graduated in the years 1880 and 81. And then after that, and this is really a theme for me as I re-looked at all of this, you look at this and you almost feel like this could be now. In some ways, obviously we have advanced, but there's only 12 women on average who graduate from the University of Michigan. Up through the study that I was looking at went through 1941. So although women started, there was always still a real minority. After she graduates from the University of Michigan, she goes to University of Pennsylvania, where she's the only woman in a class of 75 men. She does this to get more information about pharmacology, and she also, because of her interest in public health, attends the oratory school. And she wants to be able to speak persuasively. She wants to be able to be convincing. So in the oratory school, she actually is doing Shakespeare and all sorts of performance as she hones her skills. And when that is done, at age 25, she returns to Utah and starts a private practice. And she isn't there very long till she is drafted to become the second resident physician at Deseret Hospital. This was the precursor to the LDS hospital. It was funded by Utah women, staffed by Utah women, for Utah women. And it still stands. It's in this is the place Monument City. You can go there and visit it, as I have. She was there for 3 years, 1882, 83, and 84. The hospital was extolled for its advancements in cleanliness, in the skill of its physicians, surgeries performed there. And it's there that she meets Angus M. Cannon. He is 20 plus years older than her. He is one of the board of directors. And although she had other suitors, she was engaged before medical school. She had suitors at medical school, including one who converts to Mormonism and follows her to Utah, and was severely disappointed when she did not marry him. In meeting Angus M. Cannon, she feels like she has met a man worth her time and devotion. And as laws were beginning to be passed banning polygamy, they secretly marry, and she becomes his fourth wife. Angus M. Cannon, the reason I got interested in this, he is my great-great-grandfather. I'm not descended from Martha Hughes, but I am descended from Angus M. And at this point, really, her life begins. This decision of this marriage changes her life radically. Although I don't have too much time to talk about polygamy in this presentation, because I want to focus on suffrage, and public health. I couldn't resist giving you this great quoted piece from her, where she says, a plural wife is not half as much a slave as a single wife. If her husband has 4 wives, she has 3 weeks of freedom every single month. She and her children order their lives and do not have to wait and be ready for a husband. When the 4th week comes around, she's glad to see him, and she does not mind getting 3 meals a day for him and making the children stop breathing to give him a chance to read. A plural wife has more time to herself and more independence every way than a single one. And this this is in an interview that she does after she is elected and becomes a well-known figure to Annie Laurie Black from the San Francisco Examiner. Although this is kind of a fun quote, polygamy certainly becomes a very difficult position for her, as you'll see. She has to go into hiding and exile as the US government and the courts become more strongly opposed and enforcing very strongly bans against polygamy. She gets pregnant within a year of her marriage and has to leave her practice. She escapes to Europe for 2 years, 1886 and 1887, as she had with her 6-month-old baby, with a $200 bounty on her head. And that was because not only was she being asked or looked for to testify against her own husband, that he was in fact practicing polygamy and cohabitating with his wives, as evidenced by her baby, but she was also wanted because as a witness because she was delivering so many babies and knew of so many families who were cohabiting. And so she literally escapes, has to leave her trunk sitting on the platform, running to get on a train with marshals chasing her. And she goes to Europe, which I had thought of kind of romantically. She travels around, she goes back to Wales, she meets her uncle she first lives with, she goes to Paris, she goes to Switzerland. But as I was recently reading the new book, which is just out, Her Quiet Revolution, which is a historical novel, it helped me realize how difficult it would have been to be a single woman with a baby, with a married name but no husband, and what that meant for you in 1886. In fact, when her uncle finds out that she is a Mormon and a polygamous wife, he quickly sets her out of his house. So she stays for 2 years and in the meantime, her husband has been arrested, he has been jailed, he is released, and at that point, then he goes into hiding for several years. She comes back and she begins a nursing school, which was one of her goals, and she does spend her time in Europe collecting materials, curriculums that she can then use in that way. Okay. During this time now, from 1888, she starts her practice again. She's started the nursing school. She's training women to help in midwife ways as nurses, and she's becoming a prominent citizen of Salt Lake City. The Columbia Exposition, the World's Fair of 1893, is really an enormous event. It has 26 million visitors from May to October. They said that they thought 1 in 4 Americans attended this event over those months. It was lit by electricity. It had a moving walkway. The original Ferris wheel comes from then. There were life-size reproductions of the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria because it was called the Columbian Exposition in commemoration of 400 years since Christopher Columbus came to the Americas. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show was there. John Philip Sousa was there himself with his band and playing. Several well-known products were introduced there. Juicy fruit gum, cream of wheat, the first ever brownie. Helen Keller and Anne Sullivan were there. Alexander Graham Bell, Catherine Lee Bates, who writes America the Beautiful with the line, "Our alabaster city gleam," which some have attributed to her time in Chicago during that fair. There was a women's pavilion, and that's where Maddie, which is what she was the name that she went by, went, and she was asked to speak at that along with other Mormon women. What was unique about the women of Utah is they had the vote from 1870. It was removed from them by the Edmunds-Tucker Act, a federal act, because of polygamy. And so they were women who had had something that was taken away rather than women who had never had this. And so they were strong advocates for suffrage. I wanted to share, some reasons that were given why women should not have the vote. It was an interesting time. There was the American Women's Suffrage Association and the National Women's Suffrage Association. The more conservative association was headed by Julia Ward Howe and Lucy Stone, along with Lucy Hayes, Rutherford B. Hayes' wife. And they refused to allow Mormon women into the organization because of polygamy. However, the National Women's Suffrage Association, headed by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, didn't have any problem with that. I wouldn't say they didn't have any problem with it. They didn't agree with polygamy, but they felt that the women should be included. And in 1890, both of those organizations decided to merge to have more strength. And at first, the conservative organization refused to merge, but Elizabeth Cady Stanton said she would not be a part of any organization that did not include all women involved with a common goal, whether they be Mormon, Black, or Indian women. And Susan B. Anthony then arrived at the gathering, threw her support behind Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and they relented and they went ahead and merged. So that was a significant happening. Reasons why women should not vote. Number one, women's place is in the home. Number two, women don't want to vote. Number three, women are already represented. 4, only bad and ignorant women would vote. 5, there was no precedent, although actually there had been women who owned property in New Jersey. They voted from 1776 to 1807, and school suffrage was given to women in Kansas in 1861. It was contrary to the Bible. Women who lack the strength to enforce laws should not help make them. If women vote, they must fight. There were too many voters already. Women voting would only result in doubling the vote count, not changing the results. Women will vote as their husbands do. If women don't vote as their husbands do, there will be domestic discord. And women are of a higher nature and not suited to enter the political jungle. And finally, women would lose their finer virtues by becoming involved in politics, thereby destroying the tranquility of their homes. So with all those arguments, Dr. Martha Hughes Cannon becomes a very eloquent speaker in support of suffrage. The Chicago Record said she is considered one of the brightest exponents of women's cause in the United States. Oh, I did that out of order. So I've already shared with you the reasons why women should not vote. When it got time for Utah to submit its request to become a state, they had done this 6 times before and been turned down. But at this point, the Mormon Church has issued a manifesto against polygamy, saying they are not going to practice it anymore. And again, in the 1890s, there is a move for statehood for Utah. There is a speech that Maddie gives in support of suffrage. Susan B. Anthony at this point had become very well acquainted with the Utah suffrage movement and the women involved in that. And she really pushed them to not let the Utah Constitution be submitted without the right for women to vote. And she said, if you don't do it now, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Take your moment and do it now. And although there was broad agreement that women should have the vote, as they had already had it, there were concerns because their petition had already been denied 6 times, that if they tried to do that, that was going to be a step too far, and they should go ahead and ask to become a state and wait to see, and then come back to women's suffrage. B.H. Roberts, a prominent LDS figure and politician, he gives a speech saying that we just need to wait. This is too much. And Martha Hughes Cannon then speaks after him. She tells the story of that she says has been told about a little Perry, which is a fairy from the Ormuds, who has glittery wings and a crown and all sorts of finery, and she flies around like a little diamond. And but there's one precious jewel one day by the river that she just covets more than any, and it's a very similar myth. She just wants that. She wants that rare jewel, and the rare jewel is called something more. So her friends urge her and warn her against the vain desire to have this jewel, that she will be conspicuous, but she's not content, and she just feels she needs that something more to be happy. And so, alas, she goes to get this jewel. The fiery rays melt her diamond robes, her feet are blistered, her wings are scorched, and soon her crown itself dissolves in the heat, and she falls dead from suffocation. And when her sisters find her, something more is scorched in the grass around her. Maddie is not having any of this. She says, the moral to be drawn from the little story of the noted gentleman is that women now have all the legal rights they require, deprived only of the ballot, which is the fatal something more, and might result as disastrously to the women possessing it as did the diamond to the Perry. Maddie says, this might do to tell the women of the East, or women who have never had the franchise, but not for the women of Utah who exercised this privilege for 17 years without scorching a single wing. In the same speech, she urged all the women to throw off the flatteries and talks of being too pure and the pedestals they're being put on, and she says, show me a nation where the machinery of every household is conducted by an intelligent woman who is its superintendent, queen if you please, and not its drudge, assisted by the advice and counsel of the masculine element, and I will show you a nation that has well nigh reached the zenith of its glory. For where the basic element or foundation of a government is healthful and sound, there is a good prospect of the superstructure near perfection. She gave over 40 speeches for the Women's Democratic Club. She spoke all over the West with the Democratic presidential nominee, William Jennings Bryan, on free silver. She continues with the speech I was already quoting. One of the principal reasons why women should vote is that all men and women are created free and equal. No privileged class, either of sex, wealth, or descent, should be allowed to arise or exist. All persons should have the legal right to be the equal of every other. She goes on, once to be born female was to become a plaything or a slave. Today, in the best, most cultivated, and most powerful circles, woman is the peer of the noblest men. If women are granted the privilege to vote, It is not going by any means to sweep away all existing wrong in the world, but it will be one more step toward equality before the law. So the Utah Constitution does put into their platform the right of women to vote. It is accepted, and the first election is held in 1896. And Maddie is approached by the Democratic Party to run on the Democratic ticket. Previous to this, there was the People's Party, and that was a party of the LDS Church. It is dissolved with this. There are famous stories or long told stories of Mormons being split Republican and Democrat so that there would be a two-party system that would be supported and accepted in America, even to where if you lived on this side of the street, you were Republican, and this side of the street, you were Democrat. Some places I know that happened, that wasn't the norm, but it gives you an idea of how committed the Utah people were to making their state work and be accepted. Many of the hierarchy of the LDS Church became Republicans because it was the ill-favored party. It was the party that spoke against slavery and polygamy. And when it disbanded, Angus M. Cannon became a Republican, and Martha just had sacrificed too much. She had been in exile not only in Europe for 2 years, but then she, after her second child, she went to San Francisco for 2 years. Her life had been completely disrupted by the laws against polygamy, and she continues to be a Democrat. She's then approached by the Democratic Party to be on the ticket. As you can see, for state senator, you could vote for 5, and 10 were running. She accepts that, and after she is put forward, the Republican convention's held, and Angus is put up as a Republican delegate. And she never really, I don't know how that all went down. She says in an interview that she heard about it, he came over, she congratulated him and thought that he would win. She saw herself mainly running against Emmeline B. Wells, her mentor, who was the woman who was put up on the Republican ticket. There was also a black man put up on this ticket. I don't know exactly who it was, but it was a diverse ticket. The newspapers definitely had some fun with this. The Salt Lake Herald said, Angus M. Cannon's a worthy man. Against him we haven't a word to say. Only we would say that Mrs. Maddie Hughes Cannon, his wife, is the better man of the two. Send Mrs. Cannon to the state Senate as a Democrat, and let Mr. Cannon as a Republican remain at home to manage home industry. The Salt Lake Tribune responded, we do not see anything for Angus M. to do but to go home and break a bouquet over Mrs. Cannon's head to show his superiority. The New York Times, it was noted well outside of Utah. They said one of the most interesting advocates of women's suffrage in Utah is Dr. Martha Hughes Cannon. As her name indicates, she belongs to the Cannon family. She is one of the plural wives of Angus M. Cannon, but showed her intense independence by declining to follow the political convictions of her husband, who's one of the staunchest Republicans in the state. Later, I put it in here just because of the national coverage. This is all the way in 1953, but Ripley's Believe It or Not in the Los Angeles Examiner did a little piece on her there. Elected defeating her own husband. Both of them could have been elected. 5 people out of the 10. However, the Democrats carried the day. She got the lowest vote total of the 5 elected, but she was swept into office with the Democratic Party and the Free Silver candidate Williams Jennings Bryant, who carried Utah, probably one of the few times Utah went Democratic for president. I thought this was fun. This was her expenses that she filed. It cost her $35, her campaign. But what was really fun that I wanted to point out here, as you're doing your history, I have had this picture, and it's only as I was preparing this PowerPoint that I noticed the notary public was John M. Cannon. That's my great grandpa. And there I've got his signature and everything right there. He would have been, he is the son of the first wife of Angus M. Cannon. By then, there's only probably 10 or 15 years between him and Maddie. And he by then is an adult. He's a notary public, and he signs off on that piece of paper for her. She's elected first woman state senator in America. That is the delegation. There she is, circled, holding a rose. To the right of her, you can also see two other women. They are elected to the House of Representatives. She holds a 4-year term because it was a whole new legislative body. Some drew 2-year terms. Others drew 4-year terms to start that, so that they're not all being elected at the same time. She gets a 4-year term, and she focuses on women in education. Within a month, she submits 3 bills providing for education for deaf, dumb, and blind children, an act to protect the health of women and girl employees. This came about when a constituent talked to her about the long days on their feet, and this act provided that employees needed to provide a stool for women to sit down on when they didn't have to be on their feet. And then most importantly, she creates the State Board of Health, and it defines their duties. To get these bills passed, they were often given flowers by others. And so Alice Merrill Horn, one of the women in the House of Representatives, they often work together for bills. And Alice Merrill Horn remembers that when our bills came up for passage, we took of our abundance of flowers sent us as legislators, laid them out on the desks. We stood up and faced the members as they voted on the measures that were dear to our hearts and that have been beneficial to citizens of this state, having something to do with public health and sanitation, with art and education, and our labors were performed with prayerful hearts, and they were crowned with success. The flowers reminded the legislators of the women voters and the power these women had with them. Maddie was never shy, and she said, "We know how to keep house, and we know how to keep a city." Other notable legislative efforts: the state's first pure food law. There were people trying to abolish the State Board of Public Examiners, which certified doctors and midwives. She fought to keep that from happening. She established an agency for the collection of vital statistics. Public health bill providing regulations regarding contagious diseases. Another bill that she sponsored that didn't pass was to teach the effects of alcoholic drinks and narcotics in public schools. In 1898, at the invitation of the officials of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, she speaks. She speaks in Washington, D.C. at the Seneca Falls 50-year celebration, and also testified in front of the House Committee of Judiciary. I want to say that was in 1898, about the positive effects of the women's franchise in Utah. Again, however, this comes to an end when she gets pregnant. Because as you remember, they had said there was no more cohabitation among the plural wives and their husbands. Getting pregnant throws a wrench in that. She's 42 years old. This is her little baby Gwendolyn, who is just gorgeous. But although there was even talk of her running for the U.S. Senate, that doesn't happen with this baby. Her public life comes to an end. This is a picture of the signature book that she's given. The Deseret News says of her, in political conventions, her wit, rapid thinking, and knowledge made her capable of holding her own and of representing her sex most favorably. Even Judge Powers in January 1899, he is the judge who brought so much heavy enforcement to the anti-polygamy laws. He's the one who wants to nominate her for U.S. Senate and says, I consider her eminently qualified for the position. She's a gifted speaker, a logical and sharp reasoner. And that ends, though, as her baby. After her public life, she then continues as a member of the State Board of Health. And in that, she works hard to bring clean water, sewage treatment, quarantines, quarantines to the people of Utah to protect them. I thought this would be a fun slide just because we are in a time of quarantine ourselves, about the regulations and the things that were issues back in Martha Hughes Cannon days were tuberculosis, smallpox, and of course eventually the flu of 1918. You can see that I've put in red, and the quarantines were pretty serious. You had to fly a flag outside of your home with the name of the disease printed on it, 2 weeks for diphtheria, 3 weeks for scarlet fever. In case of death, the flag must show for 7 days after, and children cannot attend school for the same period. She also tried to pass a bill for children had to be vaccinated for smallpox before they could enter school. But that met a lot of opposition, just as there are all sides as we go through our own period on public health. I think I'm looking in the wrong book. There were different sides in this time. The Apostle Brigham Young Jr. believed that God alone could heal the contagious diseases, and he wrote in the Deseret News that vaccinating school children was an example of Gentile doctors trying to force Babylon into the people, and some of them are willing to disease the blood of our children if they can do so, and they think they're doing God's service. Pretty strong words. The Deseret News editor was Charles Penrose. His wife was also one of the medical doctors, so it held a lot of weight. They opposed the vaccination, and what eventually turned the tide was an LDS apostle, and his wife died of smallpox, and after that, the LDS Church did come out in favor of vaccination, changing the feelings, and the church and the politics of early Utah are very intertwined. After her public life, she then maintains a private practice. She continues on the Utah State Board of Health. The Democratic Party activities she's still a part of. The Democratic Party starts to wane pretty early. She's a delegate to the state convention in 1901. And at that point, she starts to move back and forth between California and Utah. She goes back and forth 17 times from her daughter's ranch in Salt Lake to her son's home in Los Angeles. She suffers a lot of ill health in that period, and Los Angeles is felt to be better for her health. She continues, though, to practice. She practices at the Graves Memorial Dispensary, which was a clinic for the poor, and a teaching facility, which eventually becomes part of UCLA's medical program. She fundraises for war orphans and American Women's Hospital. She continues her suffrage work. She attends the American Suffrage Association convention in 1927. She became the vice president of the National Congress of Tuberculosis in 1920, and she became an expert on narcotic addiction. Something you may, this was the time when Coca-Cola actually had cocaine in it, and there were a lot of addictions that happened before things kind of came around and we knew more about the dangers or acknowledged the dangers. She was drafted into the Volunteer Medical Service Corps, but the war ended shortly thereafter. And so she never really ended up doing anything in that way, but you can see her certificate there. Her children, she has 3 children. Elizabeth Rachel Cannon, her oldest, who becomes a writer and does write a memoir of her mother. James Hughes Cannon, who becomes a very famous inventor. I'm going to show you a slide about him in a second. And then her baby, Gwendolyn, who becomes an actress and a speaker. And she dies at age 29 of tuberculosis. James Hughes Cannon, however, invents the Cannon plug, and this is a picture of it. You might recognize that Cannon plug. He's the founder of Cannon Electric Company. This is right from their website, their current website, which is now ITT Cannon Veeam. This plug is found in every airplane engine, and you can see it's a precursor to our computer plugs. I see you engineers seeing, maybe you can tell me more about that. The first time I came to Temecula was in 1984 when I wrote a paper about Martha Hughes Cannon, and I came here to meet her granddaughter, Helen Ovard. I was kind of hoping by saying that name today, maybe somebody will tell me that they knew Helen. Little did I know I'd be moving to Temecula within the year of that trip. But Helen lived here for a number of years before moving back to Utah in her retirement. Honors that have come to Martha Hughes since. When I wrote a paper about her to graduate from college in 1985, I was amazed at how little information there was about what I considered this very accomplished and famous woman. Since then, much has happened. At the time, this plaque that is shown here, it was by her first office. It's a drinking fountain right outside of the Greyhound bus station, downtown Salt Lake City. And it has on it, in memory of Martha Hughes Cannon, pioneer doctor, first woman state senator in U.S., author of Utah sanitation laws, and member of First State Board of Health. In addition, then, as the years have followed, the ball just has been rolling, and more recognition is coming to her. In 1984, the public health building in Salt Lake City was named for her. A resolution was passed to have a stamp. However, the post office never ended up following through on that. There's a conference room named for her in the Salt Lake City County building. There's the Martha Hughes Cannon Award. I like that one, to recognize individuals who made significant contributions to the health of Utah mothers and children. There was a musical written by Noni Sorensen called Maddie that's been performed many times. And then in July 24th, 1996, an 8-foot statue of Martha Hughes Cannon was unveiled in the Utah Capitol Rotunda. That was a very exciting day for me. I was just thrilled about that. Since then, in 2015, the women legislators in Utah formed the Martha Hughes Cannon Caucus. It's bipartisan, bicameral, and the goal is to speak up for women's issues and train and encourage other women who have the desire to serve in politics. Then the Better Days campaign started, and since I don't live in Utah, I hadn't really heard about that, and I went to this conference, and all of a sudden there was a poster of Martha Hughes Cannon there. There were buttons with her picture on them, and I was like, what is happening? And what was happening is that there was a movement afoot to send Martha Hughes Cannon as a statue in the U.S. Congress Statuary Hall. This is a picture of the governor signing the bill to send her. Most of you probably are aware in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., each state is given 2 statues to represent their state. Utah's been represented by Brigham Young and Philo T. Farnsworth, the inventor of the TV. But Philo has been retired, and Martha Hughes is headed that way. She was to be installed September of this year. I did get word that has been delayed. They don't know when that will happen. But when we can all meet again, her installation will take place. This is a prototype of the statue. And since then, books, plays, documentaries, podcasts, interviews, screenings, Twitter, YouTube, and a website, sendmartha.com, have all happened. And what has been so exciting for me, and what I wanted just to close with 2 things, is since we all are local historians and love local history and love history, period, this has been my claim to fame, Martha Hughes Cannon. I wrote a paper on her in college in 1985, and since then, every single one of these books, I'm in the bibliography. When I was doing the research, it was before the internet, so I had to do a lot of things, but now you could just go on the internet and put in her name, and I went to Wikipedia the other day for this, and there I am in the bibliography on the Wikipedia. So it just goes to show what an impact you can make, and I know some of you watching this have made, by doing historical work. For me, Martha Hughes Cannon became a dear friend as a young mother. I was pregnant with my 2nd child. I was trying to graduate from college. And she was an inspiration for me as her reminder to not be discouraged, to go ahead and go for the something more, that I wouldn't burn up in the sun, that I could go ahead and pursue those things that I was interested in, along with being a good mother and taking care of my home and my children. And when I look back now, what is that? It's not 40 years, is it? Yeah, it's almost 40 years. 35 years. I have to wonder what kind of impact she really made in my life, what things I'm doing now that maybe I wouldn't have done without her inspiration. So I'm very grateful to her, and I've loved learning about her, loved being able to share about her tonight. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen, and if anybody has any questions, I don't see really too much in the chat, just hellos. It's not really easy to do it this way as if we were all sitting together. Well, thank you so much for spending the evening with us. We're going to go ahead and close, and hopefully we will be able to see you next month in person on the 4th Monday of the month. Look at our website, look at our Facebook page to get all the updates. Thank you so much.